Welcome to Westbrook's COVID Conversations. Joining me today is Kevin Vermaak. Kevin is the founder of the ABSA Cape Epic, which was founded back in 2004 and quickly has become known as the Tour de France of mountain biking in South Africa. Today, we'd like to discuss a little bit more around the business of sport, especially what it looks like during COVID-19. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
Kevin, maybe let's start with the ABSA Cape Epic. It's an event that I understand is now the most televised mountain bike event in the world. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's in our backyard down in Cape Town. Can you give us just a little bit of background to the history and scale of the event?
Yes, I started the race back in 2004, as you mentioned, and the idea always was to run it as a business and to become the most valuable mountain biking sports event brand in the world. And we achieved that relatively quickly because mountain biking is not road cycling, and there was opportunity there to be the number one quite, I want to say easily, but that was the plan from the beginning. And to give you an idea how we compare to mountain biking as a sport in general, in the same way that the Tour de France dominates road cycling, our media value and our global audience figures are more than double the total audience figures of the entire season of the UCI Mountain Bike World Cup. So we certainly created a valuable property. Our sponsors pay figures that are much higher than are on average in the mountain biking sector. So yes, it's an valuable event. Participants pay almost $100,000 or $6,500 now to enter a team. They generally spend over $10,000 per team to do the race with all the optional extras we sell them. So yes, it's turned into quite a nice little business that we run out of Cape Town. And since the start of the event, almost 17 years ago now, we've sold the event to the largest mass participation sports event in the world. And we've bought subsequently other races around the world, including in South Africa, to create a series where the ABSA Cape Epic is the pinnacle of that series.
Kevin, the 2020 event was quite a story. You want to just give the listeners a little bit of background to what happened?
Yeah, so I think South Africa was a little bit behind the rest of the world in terms of reacting to the crisis. But obviously it also hadn't impacted South Africa as much as it had in, say, Europe already. And so in Cape Town, we had the Cape Town Cycle Tour, went ahead on, with 30,000 participants, almost 5,000 internationals, no problem. And, so we'd been given the green light from Western Cape government, and we've been deferring to them throughout the process of preparing for doing a race within a pandemic. And all our riders that arrived in South Africa, we'd confirmed that the race was going ahead in the same way that Western Cape government had said we're open for business, nothing's been cancelled. It's crazy in hindsight, but at the time that's the information everyone had. And then things came to a head literally 36 hours before the race was due to start, and less than 12 hours before registration was starting. The event was cancelled because, well, the Western Cape government knew that our president was going to cancel all events on the Sunday night. So we would have had to evacuate on Monday morning if we'd started the race on Sunday. So it was a very late cancellation, and obviously it created a lot of angst with, you got over half our field is international, and certainly all the biggest names and the prospective winners of the race, all international riders, and they're out with their entourages, and obviously they were aware of what was happening in Europe already, but they'd come out with the hope that they're going to ride the race. And yeah, it was cancelled. So for us, it was a big challenge because we'd also committed all our expenses. It takes us 2-3 weeks to set up the villages through the Western Cape that host the race. It's like 5,000 people that are, moving from venue to venue, besides the, tens of thousands of spectators. And so we're sitting with a situation where we had all our riders going home without, and incurring even more expense to get home with all the flight cancellations. And then, we spent all their money already anyway, because we've been running for a year on the entry fee. So it was an interesting situation to get out of. And we've navigated it, I think, quite nicely now, because we've opened the entries for next year and made an offer to the riders that were affected with the cancellation, and by and large, they've taken up our offer.
Kevin, while we're on that, I suppose notwithstanding the heartbreak for many participants this year in the ABSA Cape Epic, your entries for next year sold out in a matter of seconds. I suppose the question that begs from that, is it just the brand of the ABSA Cape Epic in particular that is so strong? Or what does this mean, the fact that entries sold out so quickly, for the future of mass participation sports events, in your view?
So I don't think that the Cape Epic selling out in seconds indicates or has much bearing on mass participation events in general. We're very different. If you take let's say the Two Oceans Marathon, I think it's about 300 Rand or so to enter the Two Oceans Marathon. They have 20,000 participants. For us, as I mentioned, it's $6,500 to enter. And typically the participants are adventure travelers, well-heeled, high value participants. And, they might travel have a different approach to traveling in this situation to the average runner that might participate in the Two Oceans, for example. Also, context is that, the race, the Cape Epic, is sold out since the first year, and it's always been an international event. We could fill the entire race with international participants if we chose to allow that. We have a early bird and a lottery system in a normal year, and both of those, the early birds sell out in seconds, 1 year in advance, and then we have a lottery that's massively oversubscribed. And so we've always been in the strong position. We had to make changes this year because we obviously couldn't open the races the day afterwards, because we had to work out what our refund policy was for the cancelled race. But we made a really great offer to them, and we also, it was important for us to sell out. We've never been in a situation where we are marketing to prospective participants to enter the race in the way that many other mass participation races do up until the end. They try and get as many riders as possible. Whereas for us, since the first year where we sold out in 3 days, and then the second year in 4 hours, we've always operated as a business knowing exactly how many people are in the race, and we sold out. So it was important for us to get to that situation. So we made I think quite attractive offers to the cancelled riders, as well as the potential new riders for next year. And yeah, the public took it up, as they do in the past, as they have in the past. And if we move on to general mass participation races, I think that it's easier for us to social distance with, say, 1,000 participants in the race. And I think that's a magic number. We're working on less than 1,000 riders for next year's race, in terms of the COVID restrictions placed on events. But it's very difficult to social distance when you've got 20,000 runners packed into a start chute, and there's only so many hours you can close the road. Whereas for us, we can use a wider spread of hotels. We've only got 1,000 riders. We can stagger the start times. Generally, once the race is, the field is spread out, you're not riding next to 1,000 other riders. You're on your own in the mountains. That's the allure of the race. So I think it's going to be easier for us to present a race at high standard and with high quality, but still have the social distancing. And that might not be possible for all mass participation events. And I mean, we're borderline on a mass participation. Normally, mass participation, big mass participation event in terms of our media value would be 10, 20, 30,000. I mean, a city marathon in Europe is 40,000 participants. Those events aren't going to happen. I mean, I can't see those events happening until there's a vaccine. And I think in South Africa, in general, let's say some of the smaller events that don't have all the business levers to pull that we've got, they're going to struggle to survive because, first of all, you had a decline just due to the economy before COVID, and you were seeing decreasing numbers at mass participation events anyway. And now, if they cancel the event and are not in a financial position to refund or make a really good offer to the participants, I think that they might lose a bit of brand value, and riders might not be as loyal as they have been to the Epic, and they might not support the race in the following year, and probably those races won't happen.
Kevin,
So
I'm interested in specifically the international contingent that participates in the Epic. I mean, I suppose it's as much a mountain bike event as it is an event for Cape Town tourism and South African tourism. How did the international entry numbers this year compare to how they have in the past? I suppose that gives us a bit of insight into what consumer behavior for tourists might be for the next 12 months.
So that's a ratio that we control because we have a lottery. Okay. And so we've always worked on, well, the last few years we've worked on 50-50, 50% international, 50% South African. And we've actually achieved that for next year's race too. But we did see that the demand amongst internationals was significantly less in South Africa. Historically, the demand is infinitely greater amongst internationals than South Africans just because of the price of the event. And obviously there's a bottomless pool of international riders that might want to ride the race just once, whereas we've got a limited number of South African riders with $100,000 to enter in a race. But the reality is that our percentages are the same for next year, but the demand is definitely down. But obviously our demand has always been greater than our supply. And I think that the international participants for a race like the Two Oceans Marathon will certainly suffer, just because of the nature of the event, and also I think that it's a less adventurous traveler. I think that the Cape Epic participants are adventurous travelers. You know, we've had a Colombian team of riders that have been locked in Rondebosch for like 2 months since the race, because Colombia went into lockdown, we went into lockdown, and they couldn't get home. So they've been living in an Airbnb in Cape Town for 2 months, and they've all entered for next year. They've lost the entry fee for this year. They've incurred massive costs because they couldn't get home, and their businesses are lying dormant while they're stuck in Cape Town, and they signed up for next year again. And I think that it takes a special character to do that.
That's interesting. Kevin, maybe one last question. How do events like the Epic adapt? I mean, you've mentioned that you have reduced the size of the field for next year. I suppose race villages are an area where people are a little bit more in close proximity to one another. What does the Cape Epic of the future in a post-COVID-19 socially distanced world look like?
Yeah, look, so we made a lot of plans even for this year's race, which was cancelled. And we worked very closely with the NCID in South Africa. And I mean, the main thing is that we have the opportunity to stagger the field. Okay, so it's the fact that when they eat, we can stagger the number of participants going to eat at certain times. Same with the start, the same with spectator locations. So I think that we've got the space to create the social distancing required. I think it's going to be natural that riders are going to be booking into hotels and eating at their own restaurants and their own, and maybe even cooking themselves in self-catering establishments. And that's the main thing, is it just wherever we can create a social distance or creating a distance between participants, we'll do that.
Kevin, it's really been interesting talking. That's Kevin Vermaak. He's the founder of the ABSA Cape Epic, talking to us just a little bit about the business of sport and what the future of mass participation sporting events might look like post-COVID-19. Kevin, we really appreciate the time.
Thank you.